Kia ora koutou. Welcome to HR Chats with me, Terada, where we chat all things HR and HR related. Today, payroll. What is the future of payroll? I want to be talking with Slavic Teplitsky, Senior Director of Product at Deel. Now, throughout his career, including at industry leaders PayPal and now, of course, at Deel, Slavic has focused on solving liquidity challenges for people and businesses, whether through earned wage access, real-time payments, inclusive product design that helps everyone manage their finances with confidence. So, we all know that financial stress costs employers, let alone the stress that it has with the employees in terms of productivity, engagement, retention. How are things changing? Let us now talk to Slavic. Hello, Slavic. Welcome.
Hey, good. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm doing great.
Hey, thanks for being here. Hey, look, when we say, when we're thinking of all the glamorous things in the world, right at the top of the list, generally, we don't think, hey, it's payroll. Payroll's pretty sexy. But you've spent your career working with how people access and experience that access of money. So when we think about payroll now and I guess the relatively unglamorous world of it, what inspired you to get into that particular sector?
Yeah, I don't know if the sector, if I chose the sector or if the sector chose me, but like you said, I've spent my career working and building products and services for those that the financial system wasn't, designed optimally for. So at PayPal, I built consumer financial services for underbanked and underserved customers. Then I spent some time at a really small startup building financial services for co-parents. So those are divorced and separated parents trying to manage their money together. And, a lot of times they don't want to have shared accounts, but they still have shared finances. So building a financial system that, includes their sort of use cases. And then, Deel presented a really great opportunity to work in an industry that's, hasn't had a lot of innovation for it for many, many years. And I thought, what better way than to, leave my mark on some other place in the financial system than joining Deel. So I've been here for a little over 6 months now and really enjoying the ride, especially as
Yeah.
it relates to working on payroll and earned wage access.
Yeah. Were you surprised? You've come from some really innovative platforms and then to arrive at payroll, did you suddenly think, oh, wow, they could do with some catching up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was definitely surprised about it at first. And the interesting part here is that it's sort of different depending on where you are in the world. So the US sort of caught this earned wage access bug and this payroll innovation bug maybe 5 to 10 years before the rest of the world caught on. But now you're really starting to see the momentum, go around the world. And that's what's really exciting about Deal is like making this these changes at scale and really being able to bring that innovation that we've seen a little bit in the US earlier on to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Because I guess when we think about it, we're still operating on a fairly sort of antiquated system. People are paid, fortnightly or maybe weekly, often fortnightly, occasionally monthly. And so when we talk to New Zealand employees today, obviously, what they want from their employer, I guess, is to be paid as regularly as they possibly can. So when we think of those cycles, what's the argument for rethinking them?
Yeah, I mean, look, that system, especially when I hear monthly, that system was built around paper checks, batch payments, and today we have real-time payments, we have digital payroll, and the real argument is that today you don't have any of those barriers to entry that you used to have with the changes in payroll and just really technology and innovation. And so, the people who are mostly impacted by fortnightly pay or even monthly pay are your most vulnerable workers, and they really need their payroll as it's earned. And so, if you really think about what the challenges are when they don't have their money as it's earned, it's, distractions at work, it's stress, it's thinking about how I'm going to make my next bill payment instead of being focused on the job. So the arguments are pretty concretely out there. The data supports really giving access to folks' salary almost in real time.
Because when we think about it, I suppose, we're going back to the past where you would, I was just thinking about it before, you would for some reason, I thought standing outside the docks waiting for some pay, and you do your work, and then you line up at the end of the day, and you take your pay away with you. But it's obviously a little bit more complicated than that because there's your tax and your superannuation
Hmm.
and all of that. But when we look at that sense of financial well-being for people in that workplace context, and making it easier for people almost to get back to that sort of that time, I suppose. Why should HR professionals really be thinking about it?
Yeah, so I started alluding to this a little bit earlier. So if you think about it, the productivity impacts that a worker has, when they're thinking about their finances and versus thinking about their actual job at hand is dramatic. And so when you think about the cost of retention of that employee that you've already invested in, it's really high. Offboarding, severance or separation costs, then hiring, recruiting, onboarding, training again, numbers show that it's roughly between zero point 0.5 and 2x what the cost of that employee is just to onboard someone new. So it's extremely expensive. That's just on the financial side. But really, like, when you think about workers, they spend more than 50% of their waking hours trying to add value to your business. So, the right thing to do is really think about their financial well-being. We've talked a lot about physical well-being, mental well-being, but sort of the financial well-being has been lagging a little bit. And it's time that we sort of bring that to the forefront of the conversation as well.
Absolutely. So now when we think about, I suppose, the concept of on-demand pay, I mean, that's still a relatively new concept for a lot of New Zealand employers. Can you explain quite simply, I suppose, how it works?
Yeah,
And I guess most importantly, what it isn't.
yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So, on-demand pay is the service that Deel offers, and there are others that offer other types of products, but I'll explain why Deel's is a little bit different, and if I may say so, much better. But what on-demand pay is as workers work and earn their salary, they get access to that salary up until payroll is cut. So let's say they start working from the 1st to the 21st. They can draw down on their salary anytime between those days. And then at the end of the month, when they get paid or whenever payday is, whatever they would get paid, we just deduct what they've already drawn down against, and then they get the net. And what's really nice for the worker is, they got paid throughout the month. They still had some left over for the month end because that's all built into the design. And for the worker, sorry, for the employer, since we're doing their payroll already, there's really nothing for them to do. It's already all worked in the back end, and so the payroll is handled with no sort of reconciling or issues like that. And what it's not, most importantly, it's not a loan. It's free. There's no interest to it, so it's a no-brainer, I think. I think when you really understand the cost of financial stress and you see that there's really no cost, the only gap there really is education about this product. It's really a no-brainer for employers to offer it to their workers.
Yeah. What does it look like from an employee's perspective? They have a portal that they go through. Does it look like they have a little sort of, a bank account? They can see their balance and they can draw out a certain amount. As an employer, can you say, well, can you program in, you can have X amount at a time, so to speak, right? How does that look for that employee?
Yeah, so for the employee, it's simply you can see the salary as you're earning it building up, and then as you draw down, it just goes back to, zero, and then it builds back up. And so you just see kind of like this running tally of how much money you've
Yeah.
earned and then what you've drawn down. So for the employee, it's really simple. And actually for the employer, they don't even have to get involved. Like I said, it's part of the payroll system. It's already embedded once you work with Deel. And so the employer doesn't have to do anything. Of course, they can choose to not offer it as a benefit to their workers, but by default, their workers are opted in. And it's really up to the employees to take advantage of it and just for the employers to educate their workers about this feature.
Hmm. So I guess if you can operate a bank account, you can operate the system. It seems pretty straightforward.
That's what we
Yeah.
tried to do. We really tried to make it simple.
Yeah. Hey, so when it comes to the kind of the usage patterns of these, because you're obviously beginning now to see some trends and various other things, how are they shaping the development of on-demand pay? You've got, I guess, new use cases like planned purchases and various other things. Can you see how people are using it? Is there a pattern or a trend?
Yeah, so I think when we first launched, you kind of saw what you would probably expect to see, which is a lot of emergency type of purchases, water bills and things like of that nature, electricity bills. But then as you see people sort of using it a little bit more, you notice that they're doing a little bit more around planned purchases. So you can see some of their money going towards a savings account instead of being spent directly on a bill. And so you see that people are actually starting to sort of reshape their payroll cycle, and instead of waiting the 2 weeks to get paid, they're taking out pay every few days and just putting in a savings account because they're able to eke out a few extra interest rate points, and just manage their money themselves versus leaving that money with their employer when they don't really make anything by leaving it with their employer. They might as well have it in their own pockets. So yeah, you're seeing a lot more of those like midterm type purchases,
Yeah.
whereas in the early days we saw much more emergency type purchases.
Yeah, because I guess you're looking at all the little payroll loans, and now that increasing those micro loans, where in between those pay periods, people are taking out those little afterpays and things like that. That is a big cost to them. If they could get that money at the right time, that all adds up over the course of the 12 months, I suppose.
Yeah, look, you asked like what's the what are the concerns that employers have for their workers? And we definitely, because of lack of education, we hear about employers saying like, "Oh, but what if my employee draws down all their salary, spends it, and then how are they going to be able to pay their month-end bills?" The reality is that they're already using alternative methods to pay for their emergency purchases. So they're taking out high interest rate loans, and this is a much better and free version of being able to finance
Yeah,
themselves, or what we call income smoothing, than the alternative, which is very expensive. And then you sort of get into this terrible circle of taking out a loan to pay for the month end, and then using your next month's paycheck to pay off your loan. And it's a vicious cycle. So really giving workers the ability to access their own wages that they've earned, fee free, is the way to
yeah.
go.
Look, it seems like a no-brainer. We should end the podcast here. I think, well, this is brilliant, but it's difficult for those HR and payroll teams. Obviously, there's probably a little bit of a pushback because they've got systems and genuine concerns around this. So, of their concerns, what are the big concerns, and how many of them turn out to be less of an issue than they may expect?
Yeah, so the big concerns are really around cost. They don't understand that it's fee free. It almost seems too good to be true, right? But for Deel, this is really a differentiator for us. We're not making money on this. It's really about us bringing the best platform to HR individuals, to service their workers. So we don't want to make money on this. This is purely a retention play for employers to use to keep their employees. So, like I said, one is fee, and that's due to lack of education. And the second one is, again, they don't know how their workers are going to spend the money, and so they get a little bit worried that people are going to be irresponsible. But when we look at the data, we see roughly $400 being pulled in advance of their payday. And with $400, that they're not pulling the full amount of salary. So we know that folks are really only using it when they really need it, and then occasionally to save for something a little bit longer. But they're definitely leaving money in their accounts to pay out at the end of the month for those month end expenses like rent or something like that.
So, in terms then of the privacy around that information, can the employer see, I suppose, A, that I am drawing down my money, or B, where that money is going to, or is there some kind of a sort of, I suppose, privacy firewall between those two things?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. So the way it works is the employees have access to anytime pay by default. Of course, employers can turn that feature off, but by default it's on. And when an employee uses the anytime pay feature, it has nothing to do with the employer. So the employer doesn't get notified of it. It's separate. And of course, however the money gets spent, it's no different than your regular salary gets spent. The employer doesn't see any of that. So when I say Deel knows about, when we see the data of how people are spending it, it's because those folks have their bank accounts connected to Deel. And so we can see that, oh, some folks are sending money to their savings account, some are sending it to their checking account. But of course, we don't see how they're spending that money. And employers definitely don't get to see that information. That's private. That's between the employee and themselves. And that's really important for employees, is to have that level of privacy.
Yeah. Is there any issues around those? But we are a nation of very small businesses. We say
Mhm.
small to medium, but actually we skew towards small around businesses that are concerned that their cash flow, because we still have, they put their invoices in for the work. It could be a month or 90 days occasionally. So, do you have any of the kind of HR teams worried about that their cash flow can't sustain something like this? Is that ever a conversation with them? And actually, arguably, maybe we need to put it up, knock it up a level as well, where they can pull some of that money that they've already earned down.
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about with Deal's setup at least, I can't speak to the competitors out there, but with Deal is we don't ask for the cash from the employer up front. So this, especially for our employee of record employees, the salary is paid at the end of the month, and if someone borrows, take advances against their earned wages throughout that month, Deal doesn't take any money from the employer until it's time to actually pay for the full salary. So there are no working capital considerations here, which is a really powerful point because to your
Mm.
point, like there is no cost to these employers. It's really a matter of education and them understanding how powerful this is to retaining their employees and realizing that there really is no harm to them once they get over the education hurdle.
Yeah. I mean, it's no shortage of innovations, and you've seen plenty over years. When it comes to payroll, improving the employee pay experience, what are the other innovations? Are we looking at crypto, providing employees with, things like budgeting tools? What's going on in that field?
Yeah, so when I think about innovation, I think about innovation and education. They need to go together. One without the other it doesn't really work. You can have all the innovation, but if someone doesn't know how to use it or doesn't know why it works for them, it doesn't work. And then you can have the education but lack the tools, and then you can't do anything with the education. So for us at Deal, we really try to marry those two concepts together. So on top of anytime pay, we're really trying to educate the workers around their pay stubs. So giving them more understanding of like how they're getting paid, what their adjustments are. Maybe they can be putting more aside, like they're with their deductions. They could be deducting less or more depending on their tax situation, and then that means they can eke out a few extra dollars per paycheck. So that's one thing that we're doing. On the crypto side, like you mentioned, stable coins. So allowing workers today to get part of their salary in stable coin or crypto, which means that, for those like in Latin America, let's say, or anywhere where currencies tend to fluctuate a lot, they can sort of protect against they can protect their purchasing power against those currencies and um, and not be, subject to that. So that's really, really powerful and educating them about how crypto and stablecoin works because that's something else that's like a topic that people are a little bit scared of. And then in today's world with AI, a lot of payroll automation. So what we're launching is a lot of these, set it and forget it type features, which allows workers to like be told, hey, we've noticed these are some patterns that you have around your payroll or your pay cycle. Why don't you do this? This could work for you. Set this much aside in a savings account. Set this much aside in your spending account. Set this much aside to your goal. So really working payroll automations and explaining how we understood, why you should be able to set this amount aside for this purpose or that purpose. So there's a lot of innovations, and I'm really excited, especially in this time with AI, how much more we're going to be, shipping for our employers and employees.
What a world we live in. Crikey. When it comes to payroll, though, because now I'm thinking now specifically around that kind of HR side of things. Sometimes payroll's under HR, sometimes it's under finance, sometimes it stands alone. How does rethinking that pay experience affect, I suppose, that conversation between the HR and the payroll teams? And as an HR practitioner, what should they be doing in terms of leading that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, at Deal, we often ask ourselves that question as well. Like, are we pitching to the, HR exec? Are we pitching to the CFO? Really the reality is we're pitching to both, but you're pitching sort of different value props, right? For the HR exec, it's all about how this is what's best for the worker. This is how you take care of their well-being. This is how you allow them to bring their best self forward to work every day and leave sort of all that stress behind because they know that financially they're secure and comfortable and safe. And then for the CFO, it's really about making sure that they understand sort of the cost structure and understand that there's a real cost to losing an employee. There's a real cost to a distracted employee. You see those that struggle with finances at work tend to either not show up or have really high churn amongst them. So there's a real cost to not taking care of that. So it's about making sure that those HR professionals are equipped with the data, so that way when they go to their colleagues, they're not just saying, "Hey, we want to launch this feature," but they're actually saying, "Hey, we want to make people's lives better. This is how we'll make it better, and this is the cost of making it better, right? This is how much better their lives will be if we can do this for them." So it's really about equipping those HR execs with the data and the information they need to have those conversations with their peers.
Yeah. If I was an HR professional listening to this right now in New Zealand, maybe I'm in a mid-sized organization. It's not big by any stretch of the imagination. What'd be a realistic first step to take if I wanted to improve my employees' financial well-being through the pay experience? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So the first place to start is really having those real conversations, I think, with your workers. Today we do a lot of things through research, like reading white papers or surveys, but actually have a conversation with your workers. Understand with them, where do they struggle throughout the month? Is there a period of time where they feel a particular crunch, and really start to build your understanding for how finances are affecting their everyday lives at work. That's like the first thing. It's always just like empathizing and building that understanding of your workers. And then I would say take these data points that I've shared today, and go have those conversations with like the CFO and the finance managers and help them understand what some of those hidden costs are that are hurting the business. And then I would say the last thing that's really interesting to think about is, today it's really hard to attract talent. It's exceptionally hard to attract talent. People have a lot of options. They're being picky about where they want to work. And if you offer them something truly different and innovative, especially around something like their financial health and wellness, it's really a differentiator. And we see roughly when we send out surveys, roughly between 70 and 80% of people that when are given a choice to join an employer that does have financial wellness benefits such as anytime pay versus those that don't, 8 out of 10 times they choose the employer that has those benefits offered to them. So it's a true cost to the employer in deciding how they're gonna get that employee onboarded and to choose them as an employer.
Yeah. It seems like a no-brainer. We're in an on-demand world where everything happens, immediately. Are we at the point now, or close to the point? I'm thinking now of though, I guess, shift workers, people who work perhaps really long hours one day and not so much the left, where you clock in and you clock out, and by the time you've got to the car or you're sitting on the train, bling, there it is in the bank account. You've had your tax deducted, you've had your super deducted, whatever else that may have been deducted. Are we at that point yet where you can literally, because we do it at a shop, don't we? Boom, we pay and we're gone. And I guess labor's a similar thing. Are we at that point yet for some businesses?
At Deel, we are. So that's with
Yeah.
anytime pay. That's effectively how it works. You work today, you get paid tomorrow, and your payroll deductions are included, taxes are included. Any sort of benefit payments are taken out of that. So we build that all in, and we do it so that the employer doesn't have to. So that's the world that we're in today. Again, we have to get that education out there. That's why I'm excited to be here. But that's where we're at today, and it's only getting better and faster. And I'm really excited for folks to discover this service and feature that Deal offers, and really better their financial health and wellness.
Yeah, brilliant. Hey, look, you've been doing this for quite a long time now, despite your youthful appearance. What's been the most surprising thing, or what's something where you've seen something you thought, wow, that happened either way before I thought it was going to happen, or I didn't expect that, or what a cool thing. Just in your personal experience, I suppose, outside of PayPal or Deal.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're really in the age of AI, and I'm finding it from yesterday to today, so many things have changed, right? And it sort of changes how you interact with your job. Like, I'm excited to run to work today, not just because I want to add value to my company, but because I feel like there's so much more I can do, there's so much more I can deliver. I'm excited to learn. just at the rapid pace that AI is just driving everything. So, things that I couldn't do yesterday, I'm not a coder, I'm not a designer, but today if I see some payroll feature I want to launch or at least test with a customer or two, I can build that myself just by, writing a few words to the AI agent, and then it's built, and then I can go and test it. And so it really allows me to be so powerful and like 100x my output than what I was doing, just a few months ago. And it's just really exciting that with that sort of innovation and pace, I really think the world's going to change for the better. Obviously, there's guardrails and things that we have to put in place so that way, those sorts of tools are used in the right way. But put it in the right people's hands, and I think we're going to see sort of like the next boom that we're already living it. But I think in a few years from now, we're going to look back and say like, whoa, like the rate and velocity of things really we're beyond imagination. And that's how I'm feeling
Yeah.
today, like every day.
Yeah. And it is, could be simple things. Needed to take some payments the other day, and I was, what a pain, and suddenly, my text platform sent me a little push message say, "Would you like to take payments on your phone?" Yes, I would. Literally, I downloaded the thing, and people can swipe their credit card on my phone. What an absolute game changer! I'd been to the bank about it, and they'd just go, "Oh, we don't really know." These little things every single day, and as I say, getting to that point where you literally you check out of work, and by the time you're in the car, you've been paid and you're on your way. What a great world!
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's certain moments in life where like something happens and you realize, wow, that we could have done this so much sooner, but we needed sort of this moment to happen. COVID's a really good example. I always think back to, we were doing things a certain way up until COVID, and then we realized like the physical world closed around us, and then everything became digital, right? And that's where you saw also a big step change in payments and payroll and how we buy things, how we sell things with QR codes and text messages. And so COVID sort of brought that first level of innovation, and now I think we're living through at the next level of
Yeah,
innovation, and it's really exciting for all of us.
yeah. I'm certainly glad to be old enough to be able to discuss with young people when you got some cash in an envelope at the end of the day, and that was your part. They go, what is cash? What's oh, actually, they probably are familiar with cash, but they may. What's an envelope?
Exactly.
Hey,
And then
look.
what's a check?
Oh, exactly. Yes, yes. In fact, I was just thinking about that today. Actually, someone I know still tries to use checks. Anyway, hey, look, Slavic Teplitsky from Deel. We'd very much appreciate this conversation around the future of pay and payroll. And of course, if you've got any questions, you can always get hold of the good folks at Deel or have a chat with the good people at HRNZ. So for us today, that has been just a really fascinating conversation, and I cannot wait to see how that plays out in the very near future in the world. So for now, from us at HRNZ and HR Chats with me, Radar, thank you. Goodbye.